Welcome back. We begin from India, where 9 people have been killed in Uttar Pradesh as countrywide protests continue against the controversial Citizenship Act. This brings the death toll to 18 in more than a week of unrest sparked by the contentious law that grants nationality only to non-Muslim immigrants. The Indian government has shut down internet in Delhi, Lucknow, Kanpur, Meerut and 18 other cities of UP. In Delhi, police arrested 40 people, including 8 minors, from a massive protest outside Jama Masjid. Meanwhile, after West Bengal, Indian states of Kerala and Bihar have opposed the new law and put a hold on it. The states have cited apprehension among the general public about the consequences of this law. US presidential candidate Bernie Sanders has taken on India for cancelling a meeting with lawmakers over the Kashmir conflict. Earlier, Indian Foreign Minister Subramaniam Jaishankar refused to meet them over the inclusion of Pramila Jayapal. Sanders said he supports Senator Jayapal for being outspoken about the unacceptable crackdown on Kashmiris and Muslims. US Senator Kamala Harris has also criticized India, saying it is wrong for any foreign government to dictate what members are allowed in meetings. The occupied valley has been under a curfew and communications blackout for the last 139 days. The Foreign Office rejects anti-Pakistan assertions made by Indian ministers during their meeting with US officials in Washington. In a statement, the Foreign Office says India's state terrorism in Kashmir is posing a threat to peace in the region. It added that the international community recognizes Pakistan's efforts in the war against terrorism. It said Islamabad's concerns have also been conveyed to the US through diplomatic channels. Malaysia has once again expressed concern over the deteriorating situation in Indian-occupied Kashmir. Speaking to reporters at the Kuala Lumpur summit, Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad said occupation and aggression cannot solve conflicts between countries. The Prime Minister said all issues should be solved through negotiation, arbitration and the rule of law. Earlier in his speech at the UN General Assembly in October, Mahathir said New Delhi has invaded and occupied the valley. He asked India to work with Pakistan to resolve the dispute peacefully. The Taliban have said intra-Afghan talks will only start after a troop withdrawal agreement is signed with the US. Taliban spokesperson Suhail Shaheen said each Afghan party will take part in the intra-Afghan discussions. He said this has always been the fighters' position and has been passed on to the press several times. Last week, US Special Envoy Zalmay Khalilzad visited Kabul and shared details of the Doha peace process with the Afghan leadership. Talks between the Taliban and the US are currently on hold after December 11th attack on Bagram Air Base. Russia and China have vetoed a UN Security Council resolution extending cross-border humanitarian aid to 4 million Syrians for a year. It is the second time in 4 months Russia has barred a Syrian aid resolution. The motion was drafted by Belgium, Kuwait and Germany. It would have allowed cross-border humanitarian deliveries for 12 months from 2 points in Turkey and 1 in Iraq. US Ambassador Kelly Craft slammed the move, saying the consequences for this will be disastrous. She said Moscow and Beijing's opposition to aid delivery is reckless, irresponsible and cruel. Now from the US President Donald Trump has approved sanctions on a Russian natural gas pipeline to Germany. The curbs target companies involved in constructing the $11 billion underground energy project between Moscow and Berlin. The Trump administration fears the pipeline, called Nord Stream 2, will tighten Moscow's grip over European energy supplies. But the sanctions have angered both Russia and the EU, which says it should be able to decide its own energy policy. The Swiss Dutch company Allseas says it has suspended work on the pipeline to avoid US penalties. Earlier, US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and his German counterpart Heiko Maas spoke on the phone to discuss Washington's opposition to the pipeline. The US and Berlin have long been at odds over the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Russia says it no longer wishes to rejoin the group of 7 because it has other priorities. Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov said the nature of the G7's activities raises many questions. Speaking at a seminar, Ryabkov said Moscow is not interested in any preconditions for returning to the group. He said the G20, BRICS, and formats for Eurasian integration are addressing more important issues. Earlier in August, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said Washington will work to reinstate Russia into the intergovernmental body. Russia's membership was suspended after it annexed Crimea in 2014. More from Europe. In The Hague, the International Criminal Court's chief prosecutor says she will launch an investigation into alleged Israeli war crimes in Palestine. In a statement, Fatou Bensouda says war crimes have been committed in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip. Bensouda said an initial examination has provided enough information to meet the criteria to open an investigation.
As there has been a referral from the State of Palestine, there is no requirement to seek pretrial chambers authorization before proceeding to open an investigation.
Over 80 combatants have been killed in clashes between government forces and rebel in Idlib in the last 24 hours. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said 51 rebels and 30 government soldiers were killed in the fighting. Thousands of people have fled to the Turkish border due to intensified bombardment by Russian forces and the Syrian army. Idlib is the last major stronghold of rebels fighting government forces since 2015. Earlier, a war monitor said ISIS militants killed 13 soldiers in an attack on a gas field in Homs province. It said 4 workers were also killed in the attack. Japan has briefed Iran on Tokyo's plan to send a naval force to the Middle East to protect its vessels from rising regional tensions. The Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe and Iranian President Hassan Rouhani discussed Tokyo's intention to contribute to navigational safety. Abe told Rouhani Tokyo is concerned by tensions running high in the Middle East. Rouhani appreciated Japan's efforts to make its initiative transparent. The planned Japanese operation is set to cover high seas in the Gulf of Oman, the Northern Arabian Sea, and the Gulf of Aden. Meanwhile, Iran's foreign ministry said Rouhani slammed the U.S. sanctions against Tehran, but indicated he wants to improve ties with Japan. President Xi Jinping has accused the United States of interfering in China's internal affairs. Speaking to U.S. President Donald Trump, President Xi said he is deeply concerned over Washington's statements on Taiwan and Hong Kong. Chinese media quoted President Xi as saying, "States need to look for a political settlement for North Korea." His statement contradicts Trump's tweet, which said progress has been made on issues from the trade deal to North Korea. The two leaders spoke a week after their envoys sealed a Phase 1 agreement aimed at ending an 18-month trade war. More from the U.S. The U.S. says it still hopes to reopen nuclear negotiations with North Korea, but is also prepared to fight and win. Tension has been rising in recent weeks, with Pyongyang carrying out a series of weapon tests and waging a war of words with Washington. U.S. Defense Secretary Mark Esper said he hopes diplomacy with Pyongyang can be continued. He added, "A political solution is the best way to denuclearize the peninsula and address North Korea's issues."
I have two functions here, as I've said before. One is to ensure that we are in a high state of readiness, prepared to fight and win tonight if need be, and I'm confident in that. And secondly, to enable our diplomats. So I remain hopeful that we could, again, get the process started again and remain on the diplomatic path.
The U.S. has relisted North Korea as a violator of religious freedom, continuing a designation Pyongyang earned in 2001. Moving on to Britain, Britain's newly elected parliament gives its initial backing to Prime Minister Boris Johnson's Brexit divorce deal with the European Union. Lawmakers voted by 358 to 234 to clear the withdrawal agreement bill through its first hurdle in the House of Commons. This paves the way for Prime Minister Boris Johnson to deliver on his promise to get Brexit done by the 31st of January. The final stages of ratification will take place after Christmas. After leaving, Britain will need to secure new trading arrangements with the European Union. We have a lot more coming up right after this short break, so stay tuned. Welcome back. In the Netherlands, the Supreme Court has ordered the government to slash greenhouse gases by at least 25% by 2020. In a judgment, the top court said the country's carbon emissions must be reduced in consensus with the international community. It said the Netherlands has an obligation under the European Convention on Human Rights to cut greenhouse gases. Environmental group Urgenda filed the case in April 2015 on behalf of some 900 citizens of the Netherlands. In a tweet, the Urgenda said the decision was an immense victory for the planet. In Brazil, a conflict is brewing between indigenous peoples and settlers hoping to make a living off the land. The government wants to expand agriculture and mining, but the forest is in the way. There's more on the rising friction between people on the ground in this report.
A trail of chopped-down trees cuts through the protected indigenous land. The site is familiar by now to Tachi, a chief of the Arara people in the northern Brazilian Amazon.
It's sad when you see the trees lying on the ground like that. That piece of wood is already dead.
Criminals strike easily from the nearby Trans-Amazonian highway. But after President Jair Bolsonaro's election in October, the logging only picked up. Frustrated and defiant, Tachi and his warriors resort to extreme measures. Bit by bit, they eat the forest smaller, sometimes killing those who stand in their way. Leaders from the Arara and other tribes hit out at the invasions in a recent meeting with a senior cabinet minister.
I am a chief. I will die if you kill my land, but I will fight for my people.
Invaders feel emboldened by the new far-right president's talk, the leaders said. Bolsonaro spurns indigenous people's culture and a right to land they won after centuries of oppression. But his emissary, General Carlos Santos Cruz, said the government is not encouraging crime.
That is absurd. The invasion of any land, the occupation of any area, indigenous or not, or private, is criminal.
Deforestation levels reached a decade high in Brazil last year. But the forest protection is a life and death struggle, especially for activists. Brazil has one of the world's highest rates of murder in land conflicts.
Once reserved for fearless adventurers, Antarctica is not just a click away for increasing numbers of curious tourists. Luxury cruise ships offer adventure as well as scientific enlightenment. But the growing trend is increasing the threat of climate change in a continent already suffering the effects of global warming. This report describes why.
430 tourists aboard, mostly from the UK, Germany and the United States, have just seen their first iceberg and caught a glimpse of Antarctica's contours. Before each stop on Antarctica, a dedicated team prepares the terrain. Comfort is a priority, but here the passengers are explorers, not clients. Before going ashore, passengers must clean their boots and vacuum their clothes. Taking food and getting too close to the animals is also forbidden. These rules aim to limit man's impact on the region's already fragile ecosystem.
We understand even more when we come here, when we see the reality, when we feel it, how important it is that it stays that way.
With 14 million square kilometres of ice, Antarctica holds 90% of the world's freshwater reserves, but remains prey to global warming. Despite intentions being perceived as good, cruise ship companies and their clients have created a paradox. On average, each tourist produces 5 tons of CO2 emissions on their way to the South Pole.
We do it because we want to see it, and we do it as responsibly as we can. But it's not going to stop us.
For the 2019-2020 season, 78,000 passengers are expected to come to Antarctica.
This is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.